Many Magic the Gathering players ask the question, what are keywords? Keywords are a core component of Magic the Gathering card design, and are therefore a major reason why Magic the Gathering is the exciting, dynamic, replayable game that it is. A keyword is a word or phrase that shows up on a card as a stand-in for a longer line of rules text. Many Magic the Gathering keywords are evergreen, such as flying, trample, haste, and so on. These are keywords that you can expect to show up every set. Some keywords are deciduous, such as kicker or flashback. They show up occasionally when a set needs them. Other keywords only show up once or rarely, like toxic or exploit. Some keywords eventually become deciduous, such as what recently happened with the surveil and landfall keywords. When this happens, cards printed with the functional equivalent of those keywords before the ability was a deciduous keyword get errataed to have that keyword according to their oracle text. Keywords can be hit or miss. Some, such as surveil and landfall, are slam-dunked home run goals, and therefore Wizards of the Coast finds opportunities to bring those back as often as they can. Others are more disappointing, either because the mechanic is too complicated, too powerful, or just isn't fun to play with. These keywords fade into magic antiquity, their memories relegated to the draft chaff piles. Although every now and again, a card or cards with that keyword is strong enough to see eternal play, and then we, the players, have to live with that keyword forever. In this video, I want to discuss the very worst keywords, the very worst mechanics in Magic the Gathering's history, from least awful to most awful. And by worst, I want to be clear, I don't mean overpowered. I did an entire video about how sometimes broken cards, like those with the Storm keyword, can actually result in really fun, memorable gameplay experiences. No. We're not talking about broken mechanics here. We're talking about the ones that suck. Flat suck. For this video, I have chosen to exclude evergreen keywords that have been retired. For example, banding. I'm also going to give keywords with highly played cards in eternal formats more weight than those that are just as frustrating but aren't printed on any card that sees play anymore. In other words, this is a video of the worst keywords and mechanics that currently see play or are on cards that see play. And you know they say a great Magic the Gathering card is worth 1,000 keywords, but now thanks to Frame-a-Majigs, sponsor of today's video, you can frame your favorite Magic the Gathering cards. If you think about it, it's really a shame to put your favorite Magic the Gathering cards in binders on shelves where no one gets to see them. How many awesome cards with awesome memories do you have just sitting folded up on a shelf somewhere? With Frame-a-Majigs, you can display those cards on your walls however you like, but in an interchangeable way. The case slides in and out, letting you access your cards easily and even swap out what's on display. The inner case has a magnetic seal and can hold either unsleeved cards or sleeves sealed in inner sleeves. And the case has UV protection, meaning that even though you're displaying your favorite cards, they still are protected. Only a few days left in the Frame-a-Majigs Kickstarter, so if you want to get your hands on the best framing solution for displaying but also being able to remove and still play with your Magic the Gathering cards, check out our link in this video's description. Thank you, Frame-a-Majigs. Before I get into the list itself, I want to highlight a couple dishonorable mentions that didn't quite make the bottom 5 cut. These keywords are poorly designed, but the cards with the keywords just don't see enough play anymore to reasonably include them on the list. Haunt is the Orzhov keyword from Guild Pact. When a card with Haunt goes to the graveyard, it's exiled, haunting another creature. When the creature it haunts dies, the haunting card's effect triggers. It's easy to see where Wizards of the Coast was going with Haunt. It's an evocative ability that, from a flavor perspective, is quite fitting for a guild centered around ghosts and enslaved souls. In practice, though, Haunt proved to be a big miss. Players had a hard time understanding what they were supposed to do. do. The haunt only triggers if the creature it was haunting dies, which may or may not happen over the course of the game. And if the creature is removed via exile or doesn't die, or there's no creatures in play, or if a graveyard hate piece like a Rest in Peace is in play, the haunt never triggers. You could also haunt your own creature, which is counterintuitive for many players. Despite the mechanics win from a flavor perspective, haunt is just a massive headache in terms of gameplay. The second dishonorable mention is party. Introduced in Zendikar Rising, party creatures are those that are warriors, rogues, wizards, or clerics. Your party could only contain one of each of these creatures, and a creature that happened to be multiple of these creature types only counted toward one of your party slots. When first previewed, it seemed as though party was an attempt to tie Dungeons & Dragons into the world of Magic the Gathering in advance of the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set that would release less than a year later. It would make sense, as adventuring parties are a key part of D&D, and thus Adventures in the Forgotten Realms would be a natural place to provide additional party support in Standard. But as it turned out, party wasn't a mechanic in Adventures of the Forgotten Realms, for reasons that were never made clear. In fact, party didn't show up in Dungeons & Dragons crossover products until Magic's second foray into the D&D universe with the Party Time Commander Precon in Battle for Baldur's Gate. As a result, party wound up being a major dud in constructed formats, as the mechanic was limited to just a single set's worth of cards. None of the party cards were strong enough to see constructed play, and assembling a party was the equivalent of trying to put together a 4-card combo where the reward wasn't even instantly winning the game. That said, party was still a fun mechanic in Zendikar Rising Limited, and thus only counts as a dishonorable mention because of the missed opportunity to provide additional support for the mechanic in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. That being said, let's move on to the real list of worst keywords. Coming in at number 5, we have cumulative upkeep. Cumulative upkeep hasn't been printed on a new card since Cold Snap, but the mechanic is a staple of the Commander format because of its printing on a little card draw engine known as Mystic Remora. Cumulative upkeep is almost always a negative mechanic that taxes permanents every turn based on how long they've been in play. During each of your upkeep phases, you must put an age counter on your permanent and then pay its cumulative upkeep cost multiplied by the number of age counters on it. If you don't or can't, the permanent is sacrificed. Cumulative upkeep isn't complicated to understand, but it is a mechanic that is very annoying to play with. First of all, you have to remember to pay the cumulative upkeep every time you untap. You also have to keep track of how many turns the permanent with cumulative upkeep has been in play. Most frustratingly, paying the permanent's upkeep generally requires spending resources that prevent you from doing anything with your turn. As a rule, cards that prevent you from playing Magic in order to keep them around are not fun mechanics to play with. Cumulative upkeep is also highly punishing of the natural variance that occurs in a game of Magic. If you are mana screwed, for example, it quickly becomes impossible to keep paying your card's upkeep cost, which compounds the frustration that you're already feeling. It was a strange choice to bring cumulative upkeep back in Cold Snap given the mechanic's unpopularity, but it did give us Braid of Fire, one of the few examples of a cumulative upkeep cost being an upside rather than a downside. And that, at least, is sort of interesting. I guess. Hey, I run it in my Ashling the Pilgrim Commander deck. The fourth worst mechanic of all time is another Ravnica keyword, which is unsurprising given that Wizards of the Coast needs to invent 8 to 10 new keywords every time we return to Ravnica. While some of those keywords are of course bound to be duds, the keyword Cipher is the duddiest of the duds. Cipher is a keyword on sorceries that reads, after this spell resolves, you may exile this spell card encoded on a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. Cipher actually had a bit of a popularity streak with Magic the Gathering players, or at least those who played with it. Getting to cast your spells additional times is indeed cool, and abilities that emphasize creature combat are generally considered fun. The issue with Cipher is it's an inherently difficult mechanic to design a card around. Play design determined that the ability could only go on sorceries, as putting it on instants makes the mechanic too confusing. It's also inherently restrictive of power level, as you can't make a card too strong, otherwise the ability to cast it again for free, even once, is game-breaking. The result is a mechanic that needs to be attached to weak cards, which begs the question, if every card that we give Cypher to ends up being bad, what's the point of putting this mechanic on a card at all? The only Cypher card that sees any play in constructed formats these days is Hidden Strings, an integral component to the notorious Lotus Field combo deck in Pioneer. Hidden Strings really drives home how bad of a mechanic Cypher is. In this deck, even if you have a creature in play when you resolve Hidden Strings, you don't want to Cypher it, because you need your spells to go to the graveyard to either flash back with Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, or to regrow with Bala Ged Recovery. On top of that, the creature that's most likely to be in play when you cast Hidden Strings is an Arboreal Grazer, a creature with 0 power that therefore cannot deal combat damage, and therefore cannot cast a Hidden Strings, even if you were to encode it onto your Grazer. Cypher is a cool idea in theory, but just doesn't work very well in practicality. And speaking of Pioneer, if you missed the season premiere of Shuffle Up and Play, where we had 2 top premier Pioneer players come to face the Pioneer Gauntlet, you should definitely check out that video, which I will link in this video's description. But what's our next most worst mechanic? Number 3 on this list is a mechanic I absolutely hate. Venture into the Dungeon, a mind-numbingly esoteric keyword that required not 1, not 2, but 3 reminder tokens, because no, reading the card did not explain the card. Boiled down to its most basic rules text, Venture into the Dungeon is almost simple. Whenever it triggers, you begin a dungeon of your choice, or move into the next room of whatever dungeon you're already in. You know, just typical Magic the Gathering things. Of course, if you don't know what every room of every dungeon does, or you forget the path of whatever dungeon you're on, or your opponent is coming back to Magic after only a few years away and reacts to you telling them that you are venturing into the dungeon as though they were Captain Freaking America seeing Times Square for the first time, well, you'd then need access to those reminder tokens. Somehow. Did you bring them? Did you bring all 3? If a keyword does not, or more accurately cannot, explain what it does in the text box of the card that it's printed on, it's not a good sign for the mechanic's grok ability. I honestly believe that Venture into the Dungeon is a microcosm of everything wrong with contemporary Magic the Gathering game design. Overly complex, adding a whole new dimension to the game that players never asked for, and created for the overtly transparent goal of just making Hasbro more money through an endless stream of crossover IPs. The best Venture into the Dungeon card in constructed play doesn't even get used in the way it was intended to when it was designed. Acererak the Archlich is the main villain of the infamously difficult D&D campaign Tomb of Annihilation. As such, when the Acererak MTG card enters the battlefield, he returns to your hand unless you have completed the Tomb of Annihilation. In practice, you never ever want to complete the Tomb of Annihilation if you're venturing into the dungeon with Acererak. The point of Acererak is he's a 1-card kill condition once you've assembled either infinite mana or have the ability to cast spells for free, such as with the enchantment Allurin. Acererak enters play, ventures into the lost mine of Phandelver, then returns to your hand. Cast him over and over to continually complete the lost mine, traveling through the dark pool each time to drain your opponent for 1 life an infinite number of times. Yay, Magic the Gathering. Venture into the Dungeon is the Magic the Gathering mechanic that feels the least like you're playing Magic the Gathering. It requires extra game pieces that are specific to this mechanic, it cannot be interacted with at all, and it can't be reskinned to fit in the normal universe of Magic the Gathering. And for that, it earns its spot as number 3 on this list. So what do I feel are the 2 worst Magic the Gathering mechanics? The absolute bottom of our list. Well, number 2 on this list would also be high on a list of Magic the Gathering mechanics that are too powerful. But the strength of this mechanic is not the main reason it has landed at this spot. It's the only mechanic on this list that had to have its entire keyword nerfed within only a few weeks of its introduction, and it still sees multiple cards with the keyword get banned in multiple formats. I'm speaking, of course, of Commander. I mean Companion. The commanders of formats that aren't Commander. Companions are, simply put, broken, and not just from a power level perspective. Companions fundamentally break the game of Magic the Gathering, especially as originally printed. Sure, Wizards of the Coast made an attempt at self-regulating companions by giving each one a unique deck-building restriction, but these restrictions are laughably light compared to the benefit of beginning every game with an 8th card in your hand. Oh, I have to build my modern deck without permanence with 3 or greater mana value? Well, I probably should have been doing that anyway. Oh, I need to add 20 cards to my deck to run this 5 mana 4/5 flyer? That gives me a second instance of all my enters the battlefield triggers? Well, it's a good thing there are so many good cards these days that I can run 80 cards instead of 60 and not dilute the power level of my deck in the slightest. But the problems with the companion mechanic run deeper than just how strong it is. Companions shrink the range of possible games of Magic through a strainer, since players have access to their companion every game, and therefore decks with companions always reach the phase of the game where they draw and cast their companion. One of the biggest complaints that constructed players have for contemporary card design is the commanderification of non-commander formats. Commander is Magic's most popular format, so it stands to reason that many Magic the Gathering products are created with Commander in mind. But that doesn't mean there aren't many Magic the Gathering players that enjoy playing formats that aren't Commander. And those players found it extremely frustrating when their favorite format demanded they put what is essentially a Commander into their deck in order to keep up with the meta. Companions also limit deck diversity, as 2 decks with the same companion tend to look similar, even if their archetypes are different. Lurrus decks come with 4 Mishra's Bauble. Yorion decks come with 4 Abundant Growth. Kahira decks bring 4 Solitudes. The problem got so bad that during Lurrus's height in Modern, Twitch streamer Aspiring Spike tweeted this joke lamenting how hard it was to brew a brand new deck in Modern. Even with the errata adding a 3-mana tax to companions, these free extra cards that you can draw whenever you have the spare mana to do so were so game-breaking that during the period when all 10 companions were legal in Modern, it was not uncommon to see competitive Modern tournaments where every deck in the top 8 brought a companion. Contrary to what the Modern ban list might suggest, the most egregious companion isn't Lurrus or Yorion. Gigantha, the Wellspring, is the epitome of what's wrong with the companion mechanic. Its deck-building quote-unquote restriction isn't even a restriction, as many decks already met the deck-building requirement before Ikoria was even printed. The upside of building your deck to meet Jengatha's restrictions isn't that high, as in most decks, Jengatha is just a vanilla 5/5 for 5 mana. Yet still, any Pioneer or Modern deck that's even close to meeting Gigantha's restrictions does so, cutting those few otherwise good cards that prevent them from putting the elemental Elk in their command zone. Some decks even splash red or green for no other purpose than to cast Gigantha. They have no other red or green cards in their deck. The companion mechanic is one of Wizards of the Coast's biggest design misses ever. Companions are the poster child of an era of Magic card design that players love to despise, but as unpopular as the companion mechanic is, there's still one Magic keyword that's even worse than companion. The absolute worst mechanic in Magic the Gathering history is day and night. Oh my goodness gracious, do I despise the day-night mechanic. It's not that it's too powerful or not flavorful enough. It's that the impact that day-night has on paper Magic is absolutely miserable. When a card that checks for day or night enters play, you have to track whether it's day or night for the rest of the game, even long after the card that initially cared about day or night left play. If you lose track of whether it's day or night and a new card that cares about day or night enters play, the game state is broken and there's no easy fix, unless you retrace every turn that's occurred since losing track and recreate the changes in time of day. On Arena, day-night is fine. The game engine keeps track of whether it's day or night for you, and all cards that care about the time of day automatically know when it is. But despite the popularity of playing on Arena, Magic the Gathering is still a paper game first and foremost, and its mechanics should work in paper before they work digitally. Day-night is at its most impactful in Standard and Pioneer, but the mechanic has bled into all other formats in one way or another. In Commander, there are twice as many turns to keep track of time of day. In Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, day-night could almost be ignored if not for one specific card, Outland Liberator. Outland Liberator is one of the best creature-based disenchant effects ever printed, and thus sees play in Eternal Toolbox decks that run lots of creature tutors and therefore gets a lot of use out of strong situational one-ofs. Eternal formats are therefore particularly frustrating places for day-night to exist. The only day-night card in those formats enters play, makes it day, and then sacrifices itself fairly quickly to destroy an artifact or enchantment. Then both players must continue to track day-night for the remainder of the game, despite the high likelihood that neither player will cast another day-night card. But they need to do it just in case another Outland Liberator hits play. As I said in our Pioneer episode of Shuffle Up and Play,
it becomes day, but what it really becomes is tedious.
Yes.
Wow. Really, really good.
Thanks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sheesh!
and there you have it, some of the worst keywords and mechanics ever in Magic the Gathering. A lot of those made in the last few years. But now I want to hear from you. What are your least favorite keywords and why? Let me know in the comments below. And if you would like to see what a commander deck would look like if it used all of these keywords and even more terrible keywords, all the worst keywords, check out my video about the commander deck of the future today. And remember, now is the last chance to get on that Frame-a-Majigs Kickstarter if you're looking for the perfect way to frame and display your favorite Magic the Gathering cards. Look no further than Frame-a-Majigs.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
Today, we have a powerful pod of potent personalities coming to bring you Commander, but with a twist.
This format is Treasure Cruise. It was developed by members of my Discord to satisfy the base Magic player urge to gamble whenever possible. It features a special add-on deck of mostly helpful artifacts with a couple harmful curses that you can roll a die to go digging and get something for free on your board.
Ba-boom! God damn it.
Is this back-to-back curses? Oh, it's time. It's time for bees.
No!
Not the bees!
Ironcrag Pyromancer. I see a lot of things that die to 3 damage, so I'm pretty excited about that.
So everything in your hand and in play dies to removal?
Specifically removal that is set up by the Howling one that's currently in play. I'll stop it. Outside of game, how, if I'm gonna just top,
I think you need to say to the camera, I'd like some top, please.
I would like some top, please.
It's almost